Welcome, Laurits Bach Sørensen. Such a pleasure to have you here. My name is Jes Broeng. I'm a professor here at DTU. Started a number of companies, left them when they were in this scale-up phase where you take over. So for me, it's a very interesting handshake that we do here, where we have a flourishing startup scene, a fantastic technology and science scene also. We have a new program together called the Green Re-industrialisation program. Maybe I should ask you, why do we need this program in the first place?
My background is operational. I spent, prior to establishing Nordic Alpha Partners together with Rasmus and Troels, I did 20 years of corporate spin-outs, corporate turnarounds. I did my own startups, but I was also running private equity-led startups, also within the green tech space. And it was quite evident that they're lacking tools, operational tools, to actually deal with the complexity of decarbonisation, of hard tech scaling. The world is changing rapidly right now. The new geopolitical situation is creating a complete new reality called reindustrialization. And if you look at reindustrialization, what it essentially means is that the platform, the infrastructures that we built over the last 150 years need to reindustrialize within the different regions of the world because of the geopolitical situation over the next 25 to 30 years. And we're talking investments in the range of $215 trillion. And just to put that in context, that is the equivalent of 100 times what we spend on the first part of the second industrial revolution. So it's a huge amount of money that needs to go into this. And reindustrialization is technology transformation to a large extent. What we need to do within the different regions, we need to be self-sufficient, not only about talent, but new logistical infrastructures, new energy infrastructures that are within the regions, new production infrastructures. We are essentially deglobalizing. And this new era of complexity is tech transformation. And it's not only about innovation, it is really about scaling this. And that's why working with Europe's leading technological university on this is the perfect match in order to really actually drive this new awareness, but also build the talent needed in order for us to really deal with this reality.
So the technology foresight we're providing at DTU, we have some of the leading scholars in the technology fields, but also this foresight. Where does it couple to you? Because traditionally there might be a gap from where researchers are to growing companies. So how come you do this handshake this early and dare to engage so early?
Well, I think the handshake needs to be there because if we really want to decarbonize the world, if we want to reindustrialize the world, it needs to be capital efficient. The $215 trillion that needs to go in over the next 25 to 30 years represents 8% of world GDP tomorrow. That's 4 times what we spend on military. If we are to find this capital in state financing, it's about a quarter of world state financing that needs to be redirected into that. That's impossible. If we then look at the conventional developments that we see over industrial revolutions, and again, the last 30 years has been very digital, that's a very agile way of transforming industries. It's hard tech. It is deep tech, it's hard tech. Most of the technologies in Europe are invented within a kilometer where we're sitting right now. So the handshake needs to be there between the capital efficient scaling and deep innovation. And we do not have the luxury that we've had over the last 150 years on time. And secondary, it's not digital. It's way more complex. So the handshake is perfect. Best innovation, best understanding on really what I would call the micro developments within these new value chains that are establishing, combined with really growth skills, growth capabilities, but not in a conventional way. Do this rapidly or else we simply won't do this capital efficiently.
Yeah, so the fast scaling, the high need for capital. Can you name some examples from your portfolio?
Oh, absolutely. I can mention a small German company called Wiferion, who managed to stabilize inductive charging, wireless charging. Nikola Tesla invented this technology 100 years ago, so there's nothing revolutionary about inductive charging. But they stabilized it. And in cooperation with us, we managed to take this technology in its first generation and make it ultra capital efficient and very, very adoptable into the value chain. And what we did is we resized the product so it actually had the same size of a cable solution for charging. And this is industrial, so it's for robots. We costed it out so we could sell it at the same cost, and we outsourced the production to a large-scale supplier in this industry. So essentially, the model we're using is called BCSA, better, cheaper, simpler, and available. And if you have new technologies coming here out of the DTU that has those 4 characteristics, they will revolutionize an industry very, very fast. And this is what they did. When we entered the asset, they had 5 customers and around 400K euros of revenue. But they made a BCSA within 9 months. And rapidly, this was adopted across the industrial value chain of robotics. So the largest logistical players in Europe are using this in their factories. And within 3 years, we were at plus 10 million euro revenue with the company, cash positive, and scaled to 33 countries.
I like that example a lot. I also like the model. It almost sounds like 4 principles that you have to obey to. And I guess there's underneath that, there's a lot of financial tools to control this. How much investment or capital do you deploy? And I think that language for engineers, technology people is very difficult.
When you're operating these companies, it's a perfect storm. Check a company again like Wiferion. They opened up 2 countries between every board meeting. And they did this quite capital efficiently. So you cannot separate these departments out too much because you need to have the same understanding of the challenges ahead of you. But what we're trying to do, and I think this is really what this education will enable, is we're trying to simplify the big challenges. And the second you become BCSA, you are just going to call customers and they're going to buy your product. A normal professional company with a qualified pipeline approach will convert anything from 30 to 40% of the projects they get into the pipeline. That's a very normal number. When you're BCSA, you're talking 70 to 90. And what is unique here is this is complete new technology that is adopting at a 3x of the most professional established companies in the world. And I think that the big benefit is it's innovation, but it's the innovation tailored around operational tools to scale your company, to drive predictability in your reporting, to actually align your organizational structure in a way that you can adopt expanding and doubling your organization every year. We introduced this term that you're also supporting called hyper transformation, which is the new reality that you need to deal with, which are 4 different things that are happening now at the same time within reindustrialization and decarbonisation. But if you're running a company with this pace of change, the capital tie down, so the investment need in order to deal with a capital-intensive hard tech value chain or hard tech innovation, deep tech innovation, is maybe a factor 10 or 15 on a software company. And then the final thing in this hyper transformation, the 4th one, it's hyper growth, which means that these companies have to grow, hyper growth defined as 40% growth every year. They have to grow at this pace. And doing that means hiring 40% more people next year than you had this year, if it's at that pace. And dealing with that transformation, setting up new countries and all these things, it's very complex. And hyper transformation is going to be the new battlefield. The corporates, if they don't understand this, they're going to be disrupted. And the small companies need to operate here.
So you could say for the companies that are growing, it's vital. It's in their daily job. Can you actually be taught that? Can you learn it if you're not in that environment? Can you learn it by the textbook? Or do you need to have some more active learning in real life cases?
To be honest, the reality is more complex, but the solution is more simple.
Right.
Because if you look at it, unlike the early tech innovation side and the early investment environment, if you use these toolkits and these approaches, you actually have a P&L. You actually have data to make your decisions on. But the 3 other elements in there and how to de-risk, and de-risking is critical because you are the pioneer with this industry. You cannot call up the big consultancy companies because you are the leader. You're pioneering this. How to manage it is, and again, that will also be part of it, you need to do this on auto projection. You cannot base this on a conventional P&L or conventional business tracking. You need to be able to have forward projections, and we have an engine that can do that. And then finally, you need to really structure the scaling approach. But it's math. In that sense, I think it's more easy, and it's easier to be taught because in the early phase, it's very engineer heavy, which is also why many of the early investors are typically engineers or people who have operated in those environments. So I believe you can be taught these capabilities, but we're also in great demand. Because if you don't have these capabilities and you go and use conventional methods of working, you're going to fail to a large extent because this hyper transformation, these 4 factors is a new reality. But I think the partnership we're doing here, we can actually build talent we can actually equip founders, we can equip investors, we can equip policymakers, we can equip everybody that is operating that needs either insights, because there are corporate that are going to be exposed to the new companies that are coming, or there are startup that are trying to challenge the conventional or build new value chains.
You could say we have the technology, the universities here. Obviously, we have investors, industry. So can you elaborate on how you actually see this program coming together and why we need each other, the three players?
If you look about the wind turbine industry and how successful Denmark was in creating the first industry, where more or less the headquarters of all the leaders in the world were positioned within a couple of 100 kilometers in Denmark. I think what a lot of people don't know is the role DTU had. That DTU leaned into this and actually set up a wind-dedicated education, which meant that didn't exist in the world. So if you wanted to participate within wind turbines, this is where you'd get the technological insights to do that. And then when you're done here, you'd go 200 kilometers west to get a job at one of the 4 or 5 leaders in the world to do this. And I think that's a fantastic example on how academia, leaning into something, a big transformation, can create an industry and a positioning for Denmark.
So the last element here, having investors very closely connected to universities, might also be quite new, at least for many universities. And of course, there's a number of investors that are key. So can you maybe put some example, concrete, the different kind of investors, also the ticket sizes, so the investments that needed and what you represent, which is the higher end. Can you just walk us through how cases look?
If you look at the evolution of a technology, starting in some basement here, getting first maybe grants, maybe then having business angels come in, and then having seed professional investors, and then venture investors, and then that goes to growth investors like us, and just going through the different phases. You know, the first thing is very much technology maturing. Venture is really getting that product market fit out there, and then really growth is the global scaling. And then beyond that, then you need the infra cap funds. Infra capital is the part of the alternative investment space that are doing the massive projects. So they do windmill farms, they do all things around power to X. So they can build new value chains, so industrial value chains. But it's the heavy capital that goes into infrastructure. That's why it's infrastructure capital. Denmark has the world leading fund, Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners, that we closely cooperate with, and they're a very good example. But if they don't get new technologies, if this value chain doesn't work, from being innovated here to this full string of different type of risk investments, to getting to a scale where they can actually put tens of billions into actually industrializing, unfortunately, the lowest denominator is going to be your net output. The big focus has previously been very much on the early side to get the technologies out there. But the fact is we're lacking the scaling capabilities. And it's very clear if you look at hypertransformation, that's why that's such a drop there on actually people wanting to bring it through that cycle. And it's creating a big strain on the infra cap funds because they're not getting new technologies that have a maturity level to really industrialize. So with the program we're doing here, we are of course discussing how to spot out how to actually make it more effective, but we're looking very much in the scale-up phase and the talent needed to go through that phase.
And numbers, if you're concrete, what are the investment levels? I guess people would be curious about that.
Going from small grants that can be a couple of 100K to the seed investors, to the business angels, which is maybe anything from 500K to a couple of millions. Venture going maybe to 3-4 million euros, 5 million euros, and then growth, which is 10 to 40 million, and then you go into buyout, which is 100 million, and an infra cap, then you're talking billions. So that is really more or less the value chain and the kind of tickets that are moving into.
Yes. And what you're saying, to be successful on the reindustrialization, we need all these players to act together, have the same language, to align financing. Of course, not everything will be successful. You've also had your challenges. So when we talk about the really heavy investments, infrastructure and so on, there starts to become a political overtone to this. So can you speak into the political landscape, regulatory?
We spent more or less 100 years globalizing the world. And now we're deglobalizing and reindustrializing within the regions. And if you look at the political system in Europe, that's actually not very well suited for that. Because if you talk again, the 4 factors on the hybrid transformation, if you look at what I would call the upper left corner, which is the establishment of new value chains or regulatory stability. If you look at reindustrialization, to a large extent, EU has no impact there. Reindustrialization, or the heavy part of the infrastructure, is actually sovereign states. So that's the individual states that needs to make those decisions. And in the US, which is one country, that's how they look at it in these things, and look at China and their ability to create stability on these new value chains as they're establishing, they're way better. And I think there are many examples that happened very recently where we're seeing struggles with Europe because we cannot create alignment across the different sovereign state. The hydrogen value chain in Denmark being 3 years delayed towards Germany as a good example. We see Northvolt, who is struggling tremendously. To a large extent, people look at Northvolt as like a venture case or an investment growth case. It's actually reindustrialization. It doesn't get more reindustrialization. So in Europe, we don't have cobalt, we don't have lithium in large scale, at least not at a scale what is needed if we really want to electrify our grid and create batteries around that. Northvolt was designed to do that. Take in used materials or used batteries, crunch that up with new technology, and then create new batteries that can be part of the electrification of Europe, which means that every time we would import a battery to Europe, it would stay within Europe. We would be able to circulate this. So it's a reindustrialization case. If you then look at how difficult the challenge they were, if you're looking at hyper transformation, well, the regulatory stability needed for them to do that wasn't there to a large extent. They needed to get high supply of batteries. In that sense, they needed to ensure that there was a market that could pick this up. And a big part of the decline was decline of orders. Then on the technology side, it's new technology. So what they had to do hadn't been done before. But also they needed to bet on new technologies needed for the automotive industry. So purely coming out with technologies through this machine that actually was exactly what the European automotive industry was needing is very difficult. And then finally, of course, on the inner side, they hired, I think, 6,000 people. And then interest rates came. And I think there were 15 billion down. And I think to a large extent, that a lot of it was debt. It actually means a lot if the interest rate is 2% or 5%, if you have 10 billion in debt. These are elements where EU is struggling to create a stability, even though the reindustrialization importance of Northvolt was so important. Still, EU were not able to provide special interest rates or special loans or stability in the value chain or regulatory stability to support it.
Okay, so what can you teach people about navigating this domain? You've also had challenges in the hydrogen space you mentioned. So what are some of the learnings? How can you apply the tools? Who needs to talk and how?
I think hybrid transformation is the best way to explain the risk that you have to deal with. And then you can say, am I a corporate? Am I a European policymaker? Am I a small venture startup? It depends what kind of J-curves you can take. What are the power in order for you to work with complexity? If we don't have regulatory stability in Europe, so that means 5 years of stability. And there are many good examples, like e-mobility. It's fairly stable. We just sold a company called Spiri, which we're really pioneering the electrification or the charging infrastructure. And that is regulated. There's a lot of subsidies going into that on the way we electrify on the mobility side, but it was stable. And then on the tech side, we can do that. On the capital tie down side, we know how to do that. And then on the hyper transformation, on the hyper growth side, we can deal with that. Those 3 things are within what the classical investors are able to deal with. And here we had stability. You mentioned before, we haven't been 100% converting on our assets. And again, hydrogen is a very good example, but also within recycling, there's been a lot of regulatory instabilities in Europe that are coming out. The new waste treatment directive is creating a lot of barriers for recycling companies.
And specifically, what are the barriers?
Well, within that, more demands on recycling companies to certify and validate than competing companies that are not recycling companies that are selling the same product. The thing is, with recycling, every batch you get is not the same, potentially. And if you're a provider of, let's say, rubber or anything, an oil-based product, you certify one, but you have a homogeneous production, which means you don't know how to recertify. But if you're coming out with a recycling company in that sense, and you want to sell into this, there are high documentation demands, so that what you're actually selling is what you're selling to that extent, which of course is reasonable. But you're doing this in a very rigid, in a very complete approach, which has very few loopholes inside of it.
Now it's fascinating because you don't come across for me as a climate activist. So you speak as if this is happening, this reindustrialization. If you want, it's a matter of becoming a winner, understanding this one here. So is it correctly also that you don't see a discrepancy between the climate activists? Traditional industrialization is also how we pollute the earth. Now you come up with the solutions, a new technology. Is it naive, as some might say? Can you be naive in financial, or are you so certain this is also the right way of doing business? And if we don't do it, we lose industries to other parts.
Yeah, so even though I'm not a climate activist, we did establish the first green tech growth fund in Europe. And we did it partially because it was needed, but also because we believed there are great returns if you can actually operate this complexity. And if you look at a lot of the climate activism out there, it's all about stop doing something. It's not going to save the world. The only way we save the world is to actually reindustrializing, decarbonized. And again, I think the positive thing about reindustrialization and the geopolitical drivers around that is it's an unseen opportunity to reach net zero faster.
Right.
Because I think the general appetite to decarbonize in itself is not strong enough in the world, right, to reach net zero.
Yeah.
But when you're suddenly talking self-sufficiency within the different regions, you're going to see a whole new accelerated attention around this. That's also creating a new complexity. And that's really what we will be able to do with this education, is equip people to understand the complexity, right, but also to operate the complexity. Mm-hmm. And I don't think there's it's a complete first of its kind.
Right.
Nobody's done that before, taking the deepest technical understanding and migrating that with the forefront of actually technology scaling and mass market adoption of new technology.
So Laurits, what do you mean by the green tech valley of death, and what can you contribute? What are the elements in this program?
Yeah, so unfortunately, the green tech valley of death is a term that a lot of people are using now. The main reason for green tech valley of death is actually the growth phase to a large extent. And maybe just to put in perspective, what are the different owners throughout the value chain that new decarbonization or new reindustrialization technologies need to go through? They're most likely being invented in a basement, potentially here or another research institute. And then you go to your early investors that bring the product to venture. You have a product market fit, and then you start your scaling. And this is where you have the big hole in the value chain. And if you look at the large infra partners, the infra capital partners, infrastructure capital partners like Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners, there are many big ones. So Denmark has one of the largest in the world. They are waiting for technologies to come up there that have utility grade performance, that are able to actually be industrialized large scale. But the green tech valley of death is in the growth phase. And that is because of the complexity that these assets are, these companies are exposed to, because it's capital intensive, it's hardware, it's most likely new value change, it is very advanced tech innovation.
So is it also correctly understood that if we look at early investments, venture capital, you make a number of bets, but you don't really know if the market is there, then you survive on 10, 20%. In your case, you know the market is there. People are asking for these solutions here. So the challenges and the debts are different from the lack of market interest. So can you elaborate how can you actually select cases, and how can you drive them, support them through with these tools, models, analytics you have? Can you elaborate a little on that? And is it correctly that the market is less risky? Unless we look at regulatory, but yeah.
No, on contrary, it's not less risky. And to be honest, if you look at the alternative investment environment, there's a perception that venture and growth are completely different risk profiles. But within the green transformation and reindustrialization, that's not at all the truth.
Right.
Because actually getting the product to a product market fit is just really the first part of the journey. actually scaling that because of the complexity described before with hybrid transformation. So you're talking about new value chains. We're talking very advanced technologies in utility grade and high capital expenditures tied down with actually scaling these companies so large that if they miss out on the scaling, they're most likely going to die. So there is a mismatch between these two realities, and the way we're structuring our assets is based on these value peaks. And if you have less money, you need to have a shorter value peak. If you have more money, then you can have a longer value peak, but never run out of the money when you're in between these two peaks. So we use all these things on one side to spot out the winners. Do they have the characteristics of being capital efficient in their scaling? And then these are the tools that we use to actually operate to ensure that we don't end on that graveyard.
Thank you, Laurits. It is important to understand these elements and what new you bring to the table. And it's quite intimate tools you're also sharing. So that's very exciting. People that are interested in this think it's relevant, but might not be operational today. They might consider be operational at board level or investors or their next step. How can these people use the education, again, if they're not operational?
Well, they will be. For sure, there's high demand for these capabilities. And of course, we're just a tiny bit of the solution here, Nordic Alpha. We have 50 early stage funds that we're cooperating with, 50, especially across Central Europe, who's working with us in order for us to really global scale the mature technologies they have within decarbonisation and reindustrialisation. We have industry companies, you have board across these many companies that are operating within this reality. And I think when we look back in 20, 30 years from now, you're going to see a big split of the people that had the talent, the insights, and the capabilities to operate in this new reality. You're going to see more billionaires coming out of this transformation that we've seen in the digital transformation. And they're all going to have one thing in common. They were able to manage hybrid transformation, understand, and have this language. So even if you're today looking out there, you're not within this sector, equipping yourself with this understanding on the macro level that the program will offer, on the micro level where you just absolutely specialized. This new toolkit, that's an operational toolkit that we're sharing from our side, and then tie that all together into a capability set. You can deploy that so many places, and there's going to be a very high demand.
If we look at the bigger picture from us as the Technical University of Denmark, of course, we want to educate students, also lifelong learning is a big part of our mission. We have great researchers in technology and industry collaboration, but bigger role is actually building ecosystems. We do see people that come in, contribute to our knowledge, challenge our knowledge, and we build together. So it's attractive for us to have many different players. So when we talk about this program and you're providing a book and models, is that it, or what else do you see in this program that you contribute with?
Yeah, we see it as a living animal, or a highly integrated part of what we're doing, not only in our own operations, but in a wider scale. We need many other companies to be successful across these new value chains that we can invest into. We need many hundreds of other funds to be successful. We expect that they will be participating as part of this. We will, as part of that, not only provide the toolkit and the playbook, and yes, we are releasing this as a book, but you'll see the CEOs of our companies, you'll see the chairmen in our companies, you'll see value creation profiles associated with not only Nordic Alpha, but also the many syndicate funds that we're working with out there who needs to be equipped around these things. We'll provide pipeline insights. Of course, we will not be sharing our pipeline with competing funds in that sense, but we will be providing what is happening on these tech trends, because the green transition and the reindustrialization is actually many subsectors. And what is happening with those dynamics is what we would like to share as part of this infrastructure to get feedback. Also because the people participating here represents a wider network of capabilities needed to succeed. So we see it as a platform of sparring, and you're getting insights into the absolute forefront of reindustrialization and the green transition.